You just bought the Sony ZVe10 or maybe the a64 or another Sony apsc camera and you're shooting some banger footage, but you're ready to upgrade your lens. What should you get? I shot a short film literally yesterday from when I'm writing this video on the Sony ZVe10 using the Sigma Prime Trio. They're 16, 30, and 56mm f1.4 lenses. In this video, I'm going to talk about my experience with these lenses and how I managed to pull off some Hollywood level footage that you can see here on screen with lenses that cost just over $300 a piece on average. This review isn't going to be like other videos on the Sony ZVe10 or these Sigma lenses where they show off footage they shot in a studio or in a park. This is going to be my actual experience as a filmmaker using these lenses to shoot a real film. Now, I've got the Sony ZVe10 here along with the Sigma lenses, but before I dive too deep into talking about these lenses, I want to make one thing abundantly clear. What makes the footage from this short film beautiful isn't entirely the camera or the lenses that I'm shooting on. While the camera and the lenses do play a big part, primarily what makes this film look incredible is the lighting. Here you can see a shot on the film before we brought in our lights. This is just what the shot looks like with the lights turned on in the room. And this is what it looks like when we turn most of the lights in the room off and light the scene using just a couple of fairly inexpensive lights. Both of these shots were recorded on the Sony ZVe10 with the Sigma 56mm at f1.4 right after each other. But you can see how big of a difference a little bit of intentional lighting does to give the shot a Hollywood cinematic look. In this video, I'm not going to dive into cinematic lighting. I've got plenty of videos on the channel where I talk about that, and even some on how we specifically lit the short film My Story that you just saw footage from. We actually use some pretty cheap lights too, rather than the expensive production lights I normally use. So make sure that you subscribe to the channel now and check out all those other videos after you finish this one. But my point in talking about it right now is to highlight the importance of understanding good lighting if you want Hollywood quality images for your films. I constantly tell people, if you have to choose between upgrading your camera or your lights, upgrade your lights. It's not as exciting or flashy as a new camera or lens, but it goes way farther in improving the quality of your movies. With that said, I put together a list of the top 10 lenses and filmmaking equipment that you should buy after you pick up the Sony ZVe10 that you can find linked in the description. And the Sigma 30mm f1.4 is the second thing on the list before any lights or any microphones or anything else. I shot about 65%, about 2/3 of the short film My Story on this lens, and I do actually think that it's worth grabbing before upgrading your lighting kit. Honestly, I would have been able to shoot the entire short film using just this lens and the 16 to 50mm kit lens that comes with the camera for the wide shots with very little dip in quality. Now, you'll notice that when I refer to lenses, I refer to them by what's called their focal length, which is measured in millimeters. So I call this lens a 16mm lens, and this is a 30mm lens, and this is a 16 to 50mm lens. If you aren't familiar with how lenses work, basically the focal length, measured in millimeters, refers to how zoomed in a shot is, and the lower the number, the wider the shot is on that lens. So if you're shooting on a 16mm lens, the shot will be super wide, which is great for shooting a wide shot of a whole room. And if you're shooting on a 56mm, the lens will be quite a bit more zoomed in, which is great for close-ups and insert shots of specific things. And a 16 to 50mm lens has the ability to zoom in and out freely between a 16mm wide-angle shot and a tighter 50mm shot. Another note on focal length and how zoomed in you are on your lens. Each lens actually distorts the image a bit differently, so you'll notice that if I frame this shot so it's just my shoulders and head on screen with a 70mm lens, it looks pretty natural. But if I switch over to the 16mm lens and move the camera closer to get the same shot, you can see how distorted everything looks. My face looks super wide and unnatural, and this is essentially why you don't want to shoot close-ups on wide-angle lenses like this. It's a lot better to use your wide-angle lenses for wide shots and your more zoomed-in lenses for tight shots. In this video, I'm going to be referring to these three Sigma lenses, the 16mm, the 30mm, and the 56mm, pretty interchangeably. The reason for this is because the main difference between these three lenses is how zoomed in they are. The 16mm being the widest angle, the 56mm being the most zoomed in, and the 30mm being a great in-between lens that you can get away with using for close-ups and wide shots and pretty much anything you need. Other than that, they are pretty much just interchangeable when it comes to things like image quality, aperture, build quality, and so forth. Now, while you can light your scenes with desk lamps from Walmart and lights just from around your house until you can afford real filmmaking lights, it is actually pretty difficult to pull off the kind of footage that you're seeing in My Story with only a lens like the kit lens that comes with the camera. Let's talk about why that is. If you have some experience with cameras and lenses, or you've been doing a lot of research into it, you're probably familiar with what the aperture in a camera is. Basically, if you look into this lens, you're gonna see a little circle that's getting bigger and smaller as I scroll the dial on the top of the ZVe10 to change the number at the bottom of the screen. That little circle in the camera is called the aperture, and it's measured in f-stops, which is why the little number at the bottom of the screen has a little f in front of it. I won't go too deep into the science of it, but basically, the bigger the aperture is, that little hole inside the lens, the more blurred out the background is going to be behind the subject that you're recording. This is a really big part of why big budget Hollywood movies look so good, besides their lighting of course, because they use lenses with big apertures that can blur out the background of the shot way out. And like I said, the size of the aperture is measured in f-stops. So the lower the f-stop number is, the bigger your aperture is, and the more blurred out your background's going to be. And alternatively, the higher your f-stop is, the smaller your aperture is, and the less blurred out that your background is going to be. If this is all a little new and confusing, don't worry about it. I made a whole other video a few months ago explaining camera settings and how they all work together, so I'll link that in the description of this video if you want to dive a little deeper on it. One of the really big things that makes these Sigma lenses great is that they can stop all the way down to an f1.4 aperture, which is super wide open and blurs the background of the shot way out. I actually recorded one of the lines from my story once with the kit lens that can only stop down to f5.6 when zoomed all the way in, and a second time with the Sigma 56mm set to f1.4, just so you could see the difference. Let's take a look at the footage.
You don't get to tell me who goes in my book and who doesn't. You don't get to tell me what's worth my time and what isn't.
You can see how big of a difference that makes when it comes to picture quality. In the second shot, the background of the shot is blurred way out, and it really draws your eye into Trick, the actor playing Liz in the film. Whereas in the other shot, where the f-stop is much higher, and I've had to raise my ISO to compensate, the whole image feels a lot more bland and less interesting, other than the incredible performance, of course. Now, if I were gonna shoot the whole short on the kit lens at higher apertures, I will say that I would like the scene differently to reduce my ISO and clean up some of the noise in the image. But regardless, I'd never be able to achieve the background separation or image quality that I can with the f.14 aperture on the Sigma lens. On the subject of aperture, something to keep in mind is you'll pretty much always be able to bring your f-stop on the prime lenses lower than you can on zoom lenses. Now, of course, one of the big benefits of prime lenses, like these Sigma lenses that I'm talking about, is that you're able to widen out your aperture and blow out your background, even though you aren't able to zoom in and out using these lenses. Now, with the kit lens that comes with the camera, you can't bring your aperture nearly as low, but you can zoom in and out, which makes it easier to shoot quickly without having to constantly change lenses or move the camera closer or farther away from whatever you're shooting. Some people do prefer using zooms, and honestly, when I'm shooting on my more expensive cameras like the Sony a7S III and the a7 IV, I usually do use zoom lenses rather than primes because of how much easier they make it to shoot. I'm actually shooting on the Sony 16-35 f2.8 G Master lens right now, which is a full frame zoom lens. So if you'd rather invest in zoom lenses rather than prime lenses for your Sony ZVe10, I'd probably recommend going with either the Sigma 16-50mm f2.8 or the Tamron 17-70mm f2.8. I know several guys who shoot with those lenses and put out some awesome work, although in transparency, I haven't actually used either of those lenses myself. When it comes to crop sensor cameras like the Sony ZVe10 though, I'd really recommend going with primes as they're generally cheaper and have a lower aperture. They're what I choose to shoot the short film My Story after all, but really, you can't go wrong either way. In videos like this, a lot of people on the internet tell you to never buy crop sensor lenses like these Sigma lenses. If you're not familiar, different cameras have different size sensors. The camera in your smartphone has a tiny little sensor buried behind the lens built into the phone. The Sony ZVe10 has a dramatically bigger sensor, which does have a number of benefits. And then cameras like the Sony a7S III have even bigger sensors. So the biggest sensor in the a7S III is called a full frame sensor, whereas the Sony ZVe10 has what's called a crop sensor, or APS-C sensor, because if you put the same lens on both cameras, the image in the ZVe10 will look cropped when compared to the A7S III because of the smaller sensor size. Without diving into too much detail, basically, bigger sensors make it easier to blur out the background of your shots, and especially with Sony cameras, the cameras with larger sensors usually come with more professional features like internal stabilization, better menu systems, and so forth. But with all that comes quite a bit higher price tag. Where the Sony ZVe10 only costs $700, the Sony A7S III that I use to shoot most of my work costs over $3,000. And this full-frame Sigma 135mm f1.8 lens costs more than all these crop sensor lenses combined. So shooting with APS-C cameras using crop sensor lenses is obviously quite a bit cheaper than using full-frame equipment. Now, like I said, a lot of people will tell you that you should never buy APS-C glass. They'll tell you that your crop sensor camera is just a starter camera on your way to getting a full-frame camera. So you should just start buying full-frame lenses now so that you can use that full-frame glass on your crop sensor and then still be able to use it on your full-frame camera when you upgrade. But here's the problem. If you do that, you're going to end up spending tons of money on expensive lenses that will not improve the quality of your films right now. If you want to produce awesome films, take that money, buy some good, cheaper APS-C lenses, and put the rest of your money into lights and microphones. And absolutely do not buy into the lie that you're going to need to upgrade your camera to one of these expensive full-frame cameras to make beautiful looking films. If you're doing lots of work and making lots of money, sure, get the expensive cameras. There's a lot of benefits to them, but oh my goodness, do not feel like you have to waste your money on expensive cameras and expensive lenses. It's not your camera that makes an incredible film. It's you as a filmmaker that makes beautiful looking films regardless of the camera you're using. It's you with the knowledge and experience of how to use the tools at your disposal to bring to life the vision inside of you. And to prove it, I shot a take of the short film My Story on the A7S III, rigged up with $10,000 of equipment between lenses and various accessories. Here's the take on the A7S III, and here's the take on the ZVe10. Side by side, you can hardly say one looks better than the other, even though one setup costs $10,000 and the other costs $1,000. With that said, it is very difficult to make a film without a camera. If you find a way, please let me know, because that'd save me a lot of money. But you don't need to spend your money on full frame lenses for Sony ZVe10 cameras or crop sensor cameras by any means. Put your money into some good APS-C glass, like these Sigma Prime f1.4 lenses. Hopefully at this point in the video I've got you convinced that the picture quality coming out of them on the ZVe10 is world class. And then spend whatever you have left over on lights, tripods, microphones, and other filmmaking equipment that will actually improve the quality of your films. But what else exactly is worth spending your money on once you've got a good camera like the Sony ZVe10? Like I said earlier in the video, I actually put together a list of my top 10 lenses and accessories for making incredible films on the Sony ZVe10. Over there, I've got a ton of information on super affordable lights, microphones, lenses, tripods, and everything you need to shoot films at the same level of quality that I was able to make happen with the ZVe10 and the short film My Story. You can find a list of them using the first link in the description below, which will take you to a special video that's not on YouTube, along with links to purchase all the equipment I recommend. I'm keeping this list pretty up to date as new equipment comes out, so you'll definitely want to make sure you check it out if you're in the market to improve the quality of your films. And with that, I'll sign off. I can't wait to see you over there and dive deeper into some of the filmmaking equipment that can help you become a better filmmaker.